Hi, this is Eccentrica, and you are listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. I came here to tell you about a very interesting client I scheduled. I was called by Prostetnik Vogan Jeltz. I told him poetry was off limits. I'm not that kind of girl. He told me he would make my world explode. I said, hey, that's my job.
Hi there, and welcome to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. This is Brian, and I'm with my friend Jeff, and we'll be talking about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in all its forms. But before we do that, let's listen to a message from one of our proud sponsors.
Hi there, this is Jeff. This is the closest thing that I am ever going to do to an actual commercial. It goes along with this episode, so I just want to announce that this coming Saturday, May 6th, is Free Comic Book Day. It happens the first Saturday in May every year. What is Free Comic Book Day? Well, let me tell you. Free Comic Book Day is the biggest event in the comic book industry. It's a single day when participating comic book specialty shops across North America and around the world give away comic books absolutely free to anyone who comes into their shops. It is founded on the belief that for every person out there, there's a comic book they'll love. The annual event offers a huge selection of free titles designed to appeal to a broad range of age levels and their tastes. If you missed Free Comic Book Day this year, it'll happen again next year on the first Saturday in May. Hey Brian, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jeff. How are you?
Well, I'm feeling comical.
Oh, comical, you say?
Yes! Because we are going to be looking at and discussing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy comic book series.
Oh, and I thought you had just come up with a great pun.
I did not. Those are not comical.
Oh, yes. We're going to look at comic books, huh?
We are going to look at comic books. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the first 3 books have been put into comics.
Mm-hmm.
Each book is done in 3 issues. We're going to do the first 3 issues of the actual Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy this episode. And then we will follow our bonus episode and the main episode after that with the second 2 books.
Right. Great. That's great. I'm amazed at these books. I mean, I did get a little bit of a preview because, trying to be smart about it. But
yes.
That's pretty amazing stuff.
And included in this episode is going to be some trading cards. There is a trading card series that goes along with the first book. And so when something in the trading card series goes along with the comic, I'm going to include that in as well.
Great. So I guess what you're thinking is that even though we're going to be doing a podcast and mostly talking about these images, some people could benefit from the YouTube version of our episode this time, right?
Yes, because I'm going to put all of the pages and the pictures of the trading cards that we're talking about as we're talking about them in the podcast. And if YouTube doesn't have a problem with it and takes it down or strikes it for some kind of copyright, which I don't think they should because we're just doing a discussion of it and we need a visual.
Right. It's an editorial, should be okay.
So we're going to start out looking at the cover of the first book. And here we have kind of a 3D generated type of graphic. It's not just your flat 2-dimensional comic.
Nope.
It's got what appears to be Vogan Jeltz and Arthur and a bunch of boulders, which I'm guessing is Earth. But what gets me is that we have Arthur with the scream,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's another picture of Arthur above it, and they look vastly different.
Yes, they do. Yep. And even the Vogon has a completely different look, because the Vogon on the top image in the title area has these big white teeth, and the Vogons,
He has teeth, yes.
Yeah, the Vogons below, they don't have teeth; they got tongues. And
Yes.
there's the second Vogon behind him must be like the Vogon guard, because he's wearing a mask.
Yes.
And then, of course, in the title page, they also, or the title at the top, it may be, but I'm trying to figure out whether those are supposed to be Babel fish that are on either end of that image.
I would imagine that they are supposed to be Babel fish. That's the only thing they could possibly be.
I know, but that's something I wouldn't want to put in my ear.
No.
It looks very frightening.
Those teeth don't look like they're feeding on brainwave energy.
No, not at all.
So on the book, this is Douglas Adams, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but the two people credited on the cover for its creation are John Carnell and Steve Leialoha.
Leialoha, yeah, that's a tough one.
Steve Leialoha.
Yep. It does say that this is an authorized adaptation.
Yes, it is. But I understand that it's kind of a begrudging authorized adaptation.
Is that right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. It was created in America by Americans, and Douglas thinks they kind of didn't really get the jokes. So we'll find some of that as we piece through. There's a very glaring piece of that in the very beginning.
Actually, now that I flipped over to the second page here, where the basically it talks about the publication here, I do notice two things.
Okay.
One is that it says this is a copyright from 1993.
Okay.
And the other thing does say it's printed in Canada.
Oh, all right.
But it is DC Comics, so
out of New York.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. New York. So, yeah, it doesn't really say where exactly it was penned or that kind of thing.
And then after that, I guess it says the story was adapted by John Carnell, illustrated by Steve Leialoha, inked by Steve Baskerville, Art Nichols, and Steve Leialoha, colored by Laverne Kinderzierski, and lettered by Todd Klein.
Yeah, that's interesting, because the colored artist is Laverne, as you said, Lovern, Lovern.
Yes.
And it's mentioned later, I think, that's actually a gentleman's name, which I thought was interesting.
Okay. Yes.
And I know that you have a lot of more experience in the comic book world. Have you ever heard of any of these illustrators or ink artists?
I am unfamiliar with all of those names, aside from this work.
Right. And that's not uncommon. There's so many of them in the world, it'd be hard to imagine that they would have hired like top shelf people for this.
Right. Well, and they may have. I'm not really up on the names of all of those. I'm sure we could do a search and find all the other things that they've done, which is probably vast, but I am unfamiliar with them.
Well, there is a little bit of a bio on one of these pages coming up.
Oh, all right. So here we start out with just kind of an overview page, and the illustration style is completely different than the cover. This is your flat 2D comic book as you expect to see type of image.
Right, and this is interesting because I was just thinking back as to when you came up and we went to the Comic-Con here in Philadelphia, actually the comic book convention here in Philadelphia, and we were talking to one of the artists because you were looking for some artists to do some special work for you.
Right.
And we sat down on a couple of different panels and that kind of thing. And they talked about the fact that it's not uncommon for a cover to be done by a completely different artist than any of the ink and the work inside of the book itself. And
right.
I think that's what you're seeing here reflected. I mean, these images, and I think you described it to some extent. You see the world explode, or the Earth exploding in the background.
Yep.
Ford and Arthur floating in space.
Holding their towels.
Right, holding their towels, and a copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's interesting.
So this is just getting you set up for what's coming up.
Mm-hmm. So the next page we get to here is what they're calling the history of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and it's a full page of text, and It's a story from Douglas Adams, supposedly written also in 1993, talking about his original concept for, or how he came about the original concept of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Right. And in it, if you go down a little bit, you'll see that he was trying to come up with a radio show, and the original title was called The Ends of the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And what it was going to be is each of the 6 episodes was going to be a different way the Earth ended.
Mm-hmm.
And they decided that after, I guess, the first one he wrote and his laying drunk in a field, decided just to go on with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy using just one ends of the Earth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's quite interesting. And I believe at some point we've had some discussion about this particular conversation that Douglas Adams has had about his creation.
Yes. And that will bring us to the actual story. So the whole first page is the preface with the far out in the uncharted backwaters.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a little kind of, you are here, but that's not the backwaters where they have this. That's like smack in the middle of everything. That's downtown.
Yep.
And they needed to put that way farther out if they wanted to show backwaters. However, I'm not 100% positive it might be accurate as to where we are in the galaxy.
Yep, it could be. I guess it depends on their perspective, right?
Absolutely.
And of course, there's a gentleman wearing a digital watch.
Yes. And the time on his watch is 3:42, which I kind of like, because when I was designing our logo, I didn't know what hour to give it. So I just did military time in the 0 hour.
Right.
But I do like the 3 kind of like for the trilogy of books.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because it doesn't matter how many there are, it's still a trilogy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I like the little joke here. Of course, they talk about the little green pieces of paper that are unhappy, and all the people that are mean, even the ones with digital watches. And then they describe the scenario where folks thought that even coming out of the trees in the first place was a bad idea. And to depict that, they have a little family actually sitting at what would be like the living room with a little coffee table and a TV, and they're actually up in a tree.
Yes. Which is a worse idea than coming down from the trees in the first place.
Right, exactly.
The next page has, and some said even the trees had been a bad move and that no one should have ever left the oceans. And there is a line of people all jumping off a cliff back into the oceans.
Right. It's our reference to the lemmings, right?
Yes. And here we have Fenchurch.
Yes, we do.
An actual picture of Fenchurch.
Mm-hmm. And of course, it describes her story of coming up with an understanding.
Yep, and before she could tell anybody, now we see that the phone was broken. The cord has been pulled out, so she couldn't tell anybody, and then the Earth was destroyed. But this is not her story.
That's right.
It's a story of that terrible, stupid catastrophe and some of its consequences. And it's also the story of a book, a wholly remarkable book, called The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Awesome. I'm amazed when even as we go through this, not the clarity, but the loyalty to the original source material is clearly apparent here as we go through it. It doesn't seem to leave large gaps and jump over the story at all.
No, they do cut a lot of things out, but it's nothing that takes away from your understanding of the story.
Correct.
Because the story begins very simply with a house.
I love it. But this house is a little different than I expected it to be. You know, it's got the little picket fence and all, and the big yellow bulldozer as it's about to plow down on them.
Yes.
But it looks like a 2.5, 3-story house the way they've depicted it here.
Correct. And here in the comic, they do a really good job for the fans, so they don't have to spell everything out because it's unnecessary to know right now about El Prosser and his heritage.
Right.
But you've got Arthur yelling out the window saying, "Stop, you barbarians!" And Prosser has his little fur hat on.
Mm-hmm. He does, but I do think it's funny here. The first thing I thought when I saw this image of Arthur laying in the mud here, he looks like, I want to say Superman, but probably more like Clark Kent here with the chiseled jaw.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
The prominent nose.
he does look like the hero of the story, not the Arthur Dent that we expect.
No, not at all.
So before we go on with the comic, I'm going to break off to a couple of the cards. One of my favorite things about this card is that this is Prosser standing with Arthur in front of the bulldozer, and this is not an image from the comic.
No.
This is a totally unique image that was not appearing in the comic at all. I just put this in here because it was a card that was different than the comic book. It's just easy for them to just crop and take out images from the comic book and just create a card. So you're not getting any unique material. But here, this is just called None at All, Part 1, talking about Prosser having his troubles with Arthur.
Right.
Here is where they have a couple of character introduction cards, I guess, is what to call them. So here's El Prosser. And now this seems to be a different style of drawing, which is very comical.
That is extremely. I know I've seen that artistic style before. I can't describe it though. But that is so funny. I mean, the other picture, he looks very much like the image that you see in the comic book, but here he definitely has the whole Mongol horde behind him.
Yes, this is in the trading cards is where they talk about he's a male line descendant of Genghis Khan.
Right.
And he has no idea, but he does have these uncomfortable visions of pillaging houses and putting spears in people. And then we come to the character card for Arthur Dent.
Okay.
And here he's having his tea in the morning after he just woke up before he realized that there are bulldozers coming to tear down his house.
Right.
And this is not the chisel-chinned Arthur that we saw laying in front of the bulldozer in the previous card.
No, it isn't.
No, he looks way more like Arthur should.
Yes, he does. Now, do you know when this card set came out?
1994.
It's got a date in. Okay, interesting.
So then we're going to get back to the comic pages.
Mm-hmm.
And here we have the whole conversation about he's had time to lodge a formal complaint. And there was a sign on the door saying, "Beware of the leopard." I was hoping that in this panel, they just have him pointing a finger at Prosser, yelling it. I hoped that they would have a depiction of that room.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Except it would just be all black because there was no light.
Right, because it's in the dark.
Right.
Couldn't see a thing.
And then we get a little change of style, because after Prosser says, do you know how much damage this bulldozer would suffer? They do the none at all. And by a curious coincidence, none at all is exactly how much suspicion the ape descendant Arthur Dent had that one of his closest friends was not descended from an ape. And this is a very pastel panel where the colors aren't accurate to what you would think. So every time there's a narration or the guide speaking, it's going to change into these pastel panels rather than the full color panels of the rest of the book.
Right, and this is where we're introduced to Ford, of course.
Right.
And in the comic book here, he looks like a cross between the Joker and...
Yeah.
I'm not sure what.
Well, especially with the pink face that he has.
Yeah, a Lucille Ball, I think.
yeah, that's it. Jack Nicholson's the Joker and Lucille Ball. If they had a baby, this would be. So here we're going to get the character card from the card set of Ford.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because these are so closely related when I'm looking at these images, that they had to be inspired one or the other, right?
Oh, yes, I'm sure. But they're just a little bit different.
Right.
The cards came out a year after the comic book, according to the dates on the card in the book. So they may have had another artist come in and do the cards based on the comic book. But they did some of the things exact. There are some things that are so close.
Right. And here in the picture with Ford, we can see those fish again with the gnarly teeth,
Right. And that Ford does look human, but there's something not quite right. So they do a good job with that.
Perfect. Yeah, they do indeed.
So back to the comic pages. This is where Ford has his idea that they're going to have Arthur and Prosser switch places so they can go down to the pub for a drink. So they've got the bulldozer driver just reading a newspaper. So
yep.
You know that they've been resigned to just staying there all day.
Yep. He's just sitting up there. Oh, that's great.
So they're going to the bar because they're going to need a really stiff drink. So here is where they talk about alcohol.
Right. And again, as you said, that during this phase, they've got it all in pastels and pinks and light colors.
And they explain the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster.
And they've got some large type of animal with huge feet stomping on what might be grapes.
Yeah. It could be grapes. There's a bug pouring grapes into a vat that's being crushed by Barney, the dinosaur.
Yeah, it does look like Barney. He looks like a dinosaur with great big feet. Little arms.
In this, they do not credit Zaphod for the creation of the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster, but they have him drinking one and one of his two heads exploding. And then being taken away on a stretcher. Yes.
Yes, exactly.
They jump back to the story where Ford is ordering 6 pints of bitter and saying that the world is about to end. And the bartender, of course, is asking him if he's going to watch the match. Take a quick little detour here because they do have a card for the Pan-Galactic Gargle Blaster.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a science experiment.
That looks a little bit more appropriate.
Yes. I have found that the card set does more accurate depictions, or depictions that more closely resemble what I expect than
Right.
the
The
comic book
the
does.
Pangalactic Gargle Blaster is being served in what would be described as a crucible, being
Yes,
handed over by
yes.
a pair of tongs as it foments and wafts.
Yes, and the
into
person
air.
who mixed it is wearing a full welder's mask.
Exactly. And the other creatures in the bar are looking goggle-eyed at this drink.
Yes, yes. So now back into the story. They're at the bar, and Ford is trying to explain to Arthur that he's not from Earth, and he's from a small planet somewhere in the vicinity of Betelgeuse. And Arthur has his revelation that this must be a Thursday because he could never get the hang of Thursdays. The next page is on this particular Thursday. Something was moving quietly through the ionosphere. And they go through the whole passing over all of the different Cape Canaveral and Woomera and Jodrell Bank, and how it's a pity because it's the kind of thing that they've been looking for all these years. And the only place that it registered is on small device in Ford's backpack or his satchel.
Right. And they do have what looks a little bit like a yellow spaceship. Although it's yellow and kind of red and kind of orange.
Yes. For whatever reason, they didn't do a good job of making it seem huge because it's in proximity to the towers or the dishes that are looking. Right. So because of perspective, the ships actually look very small.
They do. That's interesting.
And then they talk about the other useful things in Ford's satchel was an electronic thumb and the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and a largish bath towel from Marks and Spencer.
He also has a fish in his satchel.
Yes, he does.
And it looks much more like a goldfish than it does like the other fish that they've depicted so far.
Correct. And then it says the Hitchhiker's Guide has a few things to say about towels. And so then we jump to the guide in all pastels again that talks about the towel and all of its uses. And they do a pretty good depiction of all of the different ways of using a towel.
Mm-hmm. They do. Although the towel looks comically small as they're using it for a sail.
Yes, definitely. And I don't know how he's going to defend himself against the guys with the sticks.
Although they do seem to be a little bit smaller than he is.
Yes, yes. But they have sticks.
Yeah, they have sticks.
Oh, and then they have the bug bladder beast of Traal. And then, of course, it talks about how you can get anything you need if you have a towel because people think you're all together.
Quite a hoopy Frood.
Yes. And they do the whole definitions of Sass, Hoopy, and Frood at the bottom.
Mm-hmm. They do.
So now it seems that they're back in the bar and Arthur's house is being torn down. And that has broken Arthur out of his trance, and he just goes flying out of the bar, knocking people out of the way while Ford is buying peanuts.
I still think it's really funny the way they've depicted Ford here. But he does have that otherworldly look that they were going for, you know?
Yeah, he's got this reddish or ginger hair that kind of stands straight up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next thing is where he is explaining to the bartender that, yes, the world is gonna end and you can put a bag on your head if you like, but it's not gonna help. But
that's right.
I gotta go. And then the next page has the bartender saying, last orders, please, which is kind of one of my favorite lines. It's just so resigned when he says it.
That's right. That's right. It's a good line. I like it.
Yes. And so Arthur's running to his house that has just been torn down, and he's going to whip them and boil them until they've had enough. And then he looks up in the sky and says, what the hell's that?
Right. And now we're getting a little better on the scale. although
Yes.
there seem to be quite a few ships, more than I would have anticipated.
Right. And so now it is, people of Earth, your attention, please. And Ford is explaining that it is a Vogon constructor fleet. So you can tell that it's happening all over the world. They start in London, and they do the first part of Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz's speech. And then they jump to New York, and it continues on with his speech. And then they jump to New Delhi, and everybody's protesting, saying, please don't do it. No, please. And he says, if you can't be bothered to take an interest in local affairs, that's your own lookout. And then the next page is Kafoom. And it is the Earth and just gone. You can't even, it's just gone. And all of the bug Vogon ships are shining their energizer beams down into the Earth.
Yeah, they do look like bugs.
And then here they use the same exact picture for the trading card.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason I included this, even though it's the same image, is this is a card that they call Prototype 1. So this is like a promotional card. When they want to promote and give away free cards to tell people that the series is coming out, they hand out these prototype cards, and this is one of 3 of them.
Interesting.
I'm going to jump to the card that is Vogon's Plan to Bypass.
Okay.
And so this is Prostetnik Vogon Jeltz explaining how they need to destroy the Earth, and it is just kind of a comical graph with a bunch of arrows, and I'm not quite sure, except there's the crossed out Earth in the middle.
Yep, exactly. With a big pink line going through it as if that's the route of the ships or whatever.
Right. Yeah, that's the new bypass.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we're going to jump to Damagrin.
Right. And here I was surprised because I took a quick peek at this page and thought to myself, wow, this really sort of does reflect the story as we were told. And we are starting to a little bit of variation here, right? I mean, we're talking about the radio show, correct?
No, this would be the book.
Okay.
This would be the book. So in the history, he was talking about the history of the radio show, but this is following the book because Damagrin does not come in at all, really, in the radio series.
Right. You're right, but they do show in these pictures the ridiculous transport of the bubble glass sofa thing.
Yes, they do an excellent job of capturing the majesty and ridiculousness of that ceremony.
And of course, there's Zaphod as we first see him here with his presidential sash.
Yes.
Flapping in the wind. But we don't see our friend. Here they are. The birds are on the bottom right-hand corner here, but they don't talk about the peregrine or the falcons, do they?
Are those the birds or are those worshippers?
I'm not sure.
Oh, I see some birds. Okay, now I see. I was looking at the wrong corner. So yeah, they've got the blue and orange birds. That must be the ones that do the nests that you can't break out of. The next page is he's arrived and he waves to Trillian, but we don't know she's Trillian yet. He just says, hi, honey. Mm-hmm. And here we get our first glimpse of the Heart of Gold.
And you're happy to see it looks like a shoe.
It is a shoe. It doesn't just look like a shoe.
You're right.
It is a shoe.
I love it. Although I do think it's funny because Zaphod here looks so much younger than I would have accounted him to be, you know?
Yes.
And he looks thoroughly buff, and I'm thinking to myself, with all the drinking he does, how does he keep his body in such good shape?
Yeah, it must just be the Beetlejuicean genetics.
Oh, we all need a little bit of that, huh?
Yeah. Yes, we do. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the character card for Zaphod.
Oh my gosh. He looks like a surfer dude with the, little bandanas around his head.
Yes. So there's a couple of things that kind of crack me up here, which I don't know if they're intentional or not, but he's obviously wearing a Galactic President sash, like you mentioned, but he's holding his drink, which is covering Preza, and all you see is Dent, which is another character.
Right, exactly.
And up on top above him are two mice that have no, and in the background there's a whale.
Right.
Like, none of that has anything to do. There's actually 4 mice in this. There's 2 on the bottom right, and there's 2 above his head. Yep. And then there's a whale falling over. So they've taken everything and just crammed it into this one picture, even though it doesn't make any sense. But I like his chair.
Yeah. What is that? Like a huge snake?
Could be. Or maybe it's that fast evolving species chair.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which didn't make the books, but that's what you would imagine it looked like. So right back to the story now. Here we have Zaphod with his arms around Trillian, looking very unimpressed. Because she knows what's about to happen.
Right.
And he takes out his paralyzomatic bomb and grabs her hand, and they run through frozen faces.
Right. Oh.
And then meanwhile, elsewhere...
We're back in the dark.
We're back in the dark.
Oh, it's 9 panels of darkness here.
Pretty much, yes. Lit by a single match at times. And then we get Arthur asking where he was, and Ford telling him we're safe. And of course, the next page has him explaining exactly where they are, and him saying it's obviously some strange usage of the word safe that he wasn't previously aware of.
I do love the bottom panel on this page.
When the lights finally come on.
And there's clothing, and Arthur's leaning into what looks like the remnants of someone's meal, and he's got gunk all over him.
Yes. Yeah, it is squalid, if there was. And so that's exactly what Arthur says. And then there's the confusion about the Dentrassi quarters, and I thought you said it was Vogon's, and Arthur being confused, so Ford gives him the copy of the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy so he can take a look.
And here the book is much smaller than described. He can hold it in his one hand.
Correct. And the Don't Panic is in large...
blocky letters. They're friendlier than the TV show, but not exactly friendly letters. Right.
So we're going to go to another character card, and this is going to be for the Dentrassi. And it just talks about them being the best cooks and the best drink mixers, and they don't give a wet slap about anything else.
They look like wolves here, huh?
Yes. Yeah, they're some kind of hyena-type creatures or something, yes. And then we're going to hear about Vogon cuisine from the card set, which is the Capellan jeweled crabs.
And of course, these Vogons here have teeth as they're munching on their crabs.
Correct. And they have a little variation from the book. It talks about that the Vogons prize these crabs for their 2-week-old rotted fish taste. And the popping and squealing sounds they make when roasted live over an open fire. Sounds that remind the Vogons of their poetry.
I love it.
So back to the book. Arthur is learning about Vogons.
Oh, yeah, and here's a picture on the bottom where they're showing the crabs and the Vogons.
Right.
Similar to the one they showed with the cards. Interesting.
Right. And here it has the same text as the card. So they've changed from the book, because the book does not have this piece, does it?
No.
No. So they've changed this for the comic book.
Mm-hmm. They're I don't remember if they saw this in the card or not, but you can see it here on this comic book page where they're sitting on those antelope-like creatures.
Yes.
Where they've actually squashed them.
No, I do not believe they had that. Oh, yeah, they were in the card.
Oh,
so
were they? Okay.
The antelopes are in the card.
Oh, gosh, that's funny.
And here is Arthur saying, "What a strange book," and Arthur explaining that he's doing research for the revised edition and how they got on board with the Dentrassi.
Mm-hmm.
And that's his job. Fun, isn't it? And so then he explains how he got stuck on Earth for longer than he was intended, and he talks about the teasers, how they buzz the Earth, and this whole time he's trying to get a babelfish, which looks here similar to what we were seeing before, but it is actually yellow.
Yes, it is yellow. And small.
And small. It does have teeth.
Uh-huh.
And Arthur finds out that the Earth has been demolished, and he really didn't quite understand that up until this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so he tells him not to panic, read the book, and stick the fish in your ear just as the Vogon Jeltz is making his announcement about finding hitchhikers on board.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's funny. I mean, they show the picture of Ford slapping the fish in the ear and water splashing out the other side of his head.
The other side of his head, yes.
And poor Arthur's face seems to be all distorted as he's beginning to understand language.
Right. Yeah, he's listening to Howl, Gargle, Slurp, Erg. Should have a good time. Message repeats. Yeah. And then there's a character card for Vogon Jeltz.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, he is a mess. Oh, and there's the guard with the glasses that we saw in the other one earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then we have Vogon Jeltz giving his whole speech. He is not sitting in a chair with bat wings.
No, he isn't, is he?
No. And there's a Dentrassi running away because they're the ones who let him on the ship.
Right. The Dentrassi in these pictures look like they have maybe 4 arms. Looks like they have 4 arms to make it easier
I think they do.
serve folks.
Yeah. All right. So why is Arthur looking all sick?
Oh, because he's rubbing his head because of the babelfish in the translation.
Oh, yes. And what I like is he's still muddy.
Oh, he's covered with mud.
Really muddy. He didn't just mysteriously just clean up. He is still covered in mud from laying down, and he's drooling, and he's a mess. And now they're going to make a jump through hyperspace, and he told him to look up the babelfish in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a little thing on the bottom of hyperspace as experienced by Arthur Dent and Ford Prefect, which is them kind of getting stretched out.
Yeah. That's pretty funny.
And then they have the Hitchhiker's Guide explanation of the babelfish.
Interesting, because in here they show the wicked set of teeth been talking about quite dramatically in these images here. And then they show the fish in the ear with the teeth out towards the world, not in towards the brain. The tail is like tickling the eardrum.
Right. And it just says the babelfish is probably the oddest thing in the universe. It does not say small, yellow, and leech-like.
Leech-like. No. In fact,
so it's
kind of pink
red.
or red here, yeah.
Yes. So this to me, I know they change all the colors for the guide recitations.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why it's red rather than being yellow, but
Right.
it's still confusing.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is a card for the babelfish where they use the exact same picture, but it is
it's
clearly yellow.
Yeah, interesting. I like that. You're right, it's the same image, but it's a yellow fish.
So here, Arthur asks if the Earth is in the book,
Mm-hmm.
and they show it, and it's just under Eccentrica golumbits, the triple-breasted whore of Eroticon 6. And all you see is the bottom half of Eccentrica,
Yeah.
and it is not pleasant looking.
No, she seems to be wearing some form of high heel. But that's about all you can see. It looks like
But she has
goat-like legs. Yeah.
Yes, goat legs, and it's yeah. So now I guess I take back when Ford had said something about rank smelling, and I'm like, no, yes, actually, yes. If this is Eccentrica, then I would believe if she smells like a goat, she would be pretty rank smelling.
Mm-hmm.
So Arthur is very upset about what it says about the Earth in this version of the guide, which is simply harmless.
Right.
So I'm going to jump to the card for the Earth as harmless. And this card is more done in the style of the cover.
Right. Mm-hmm. Or like a 3D image with looks like computer graphic board or something behind it, you know?
Yes. And then Ford says the new version says mostly harmless, which doesn't make Arthur feel any better. And then they get to meet the Vogon guard who is going to bring them to Jeltz.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is a page from the guide that explains Vogon poetry.
There's quite an interesting image here.
Yes. And all of the worst poetry in the universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they have a picture of Paula Nancy Millstone Jennings of Greenbridge, Essex. Sitting under a tree.
Yep.
Yeah. Butterflies around her.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There you go.
And before that, there's Grunthos the Flatulent being throttled by his own small intestine, which jumped out of his body.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, they've got people exploding, it looks like, in the audience.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And our green putty poem.
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
So now we're to Vogon Jeltz reading his poem to them, and they are in their poetry appreciation chairs, and it is quite torturesome. And he gives them a choice where they can die in the vacuum of space, or tell me how good you thought my poem was. And without missing a beat, Arthur goes, actually, I quite liked it. And then Ford got in on it, and they go back and forth, but he didn't buy it.
On these pages, you do see Vogon Jeltz in a chair. At least it's black. It doesn't look like bat wings, though.
Right.
Resistance is useless.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Arthur still has a headache, doesn't want to die with a headache.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's where counterpoint the surrealism of the underlying metaphor. Death's too good for them. So they're being dragged through the ship, and we get kind of a nice interior view of the ship. So it isn't pretty, but it's large.
No,
I'll give
no.
them that.
Yeah.
A lot of wasted space.
I do like that. It's at some level you kind of get a little bit of the sort of heavy metal vibes on this particular artist's renditions here. You know,
Right.
he has a little bit of that kind of graphic going on most of the time.
Yes,
with these
definitely.
wide shots.
So they're trying to talk the guard out of doing his job, asking him if he really likes what he does. If he gets a full, satisfying life stomping around, shouting, and pushing people out of spaceships. And he says the hours are good.
I guess they'd have to be, right?
Yes. And he explains that his aunt said that a spaceship guard was good career for a young Vogon. Uniform, low-slung stun ray holster, mindless tedium. And so then I jump to a card, which is the Vogon Elementary School, which cracked me up.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
So this is all of them, I guess, being taught how to stomp around and shout.
Mm-hmm. And I love how the teacher has a patch over one eye.
Yes, yes. They needed like resistance is useless over the top. Like they're all yelling it at the same time.
Oh gosh, I love it.
But he decides that he's not going to change careers and he is going to throw them into the airlock.
I love how he throws him in there and says, "Thanks for showing an interest. Bye now."
Yeah, that's right.
Oh gosh, resistance is useless.
Oh, and then, of course, Ford has to do his Beethoven's Fifth Symphony impression to see if it stirs anything in him. But no, not really.
He puts his fist right through his face to push him back in.
Yes.
Oh.
And then Ford's like, potentially bright lad, I thought.
And he's humming as he leaves. Dum da dum dum.
I thought he was doing the Beethoven's Fifth.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah, so it did stir something in him, and he
did, yes.
Yeah.
No. Ha 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 ha.
And he decides that it doesn't stir anything in him. And so they're trapped. And Ford is explaining how they have 30 seconds. And here he says, if you take in a lung full of air, but I believe the book says if you expel all the air from your lungs.
That makes sense.
You know, because if you took in a lung, you'd pop.
Right.
So you want to expel everything.
Right.
And you can last 30 seconds. But I don't want to test the theory.
No, let's not.
And of course they have... It's at times like this when I'm trapped in a Vogon airlock with a man from Beetlejuice about to die of asphyxiation in deep space that I really wish I'd listened to what my mother told me when I was young. What'd she tell you? I don't know. I didn't listen.
Oh. And then, whoop.
And then yep. And an image very similar yet different to the first image of the book that has them expelled out into space and the ship's
holding
flying
their breath
away.
With to be continued down along the bottom. Yes.
Yes. And then it says, be with us next time for volume 2, and it gives a little bit of a preview on what's coming up in the second book. And it's all print over one of the 3D style pictures of Zaphod, Arthur, Trillian, all on the Heart of Gold, which we don't know about yet.
With 2 missiles floating in at them.
Yes. And then here's little bios. Douglas Adams, John Carnell, Steve Leialoha, Steve Baskerville, Arthur Nichols, Laverne Kindzierski, and Todd Klein. And then more credits at the end of the book. And the back cover of the book says, "Don't panic." And this is not a review copy not for sale for this comic book. It is for Ford's copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Brian, looking at the record time so far, after just one of the 3 volumes,
Yes.
I think we'll do everybody a favor, and we're just going to stop this episode here. And
Okay.
where we expected to do all 3 volumes, we're just going to do this, but we're going to do 2 bonus episodes this month, which are going to be volume 2 and 3 of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah, I like it. That's good.
And I think we'll do that for the other 2 books too. So next month, volume 1 of Restaurant will be the main episode. 2 and 3 will be bonus episodes. And then in June, Life, the Universe, and Everything will be the main episode, volume 1. And again, 2 bonus episodes. So extra bonus episodes coming just so you don't have to sit through 3 hours of us babbling on and on.
Oh my gosh, could you imagine?
No,
We're
I
the ones
can't.
doing the babbling.
That's right. Smaller bites, smaller bites.
You got it. You got it.
So since I've explained what's happening for the next couple of episodes, I think it's time to say goodbye. So say goodbye, Brian.
Aren't you going to ask me what I'm doing?
What do you mean am I going to ask you what you're doing? Can you hear me?
I'm holding my breath.
Oh, God. Did you expel all the air out of your lungs?
Of course.
Thank you for making that so awkward.
But isn't that funnier that way?
Yes, it is. Thank you for listening to Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea. Look for us the first Thursday of every month for a full episode. We will also release a bonus episode later in the month. A very special thanks goes out to Luke, Max, Greg, and Tim Lesnick for arranging and performing our opening theme. We would also like to thank our talented friends and family for their voice work on our introductions and commercials. For this episode, a special thank you to Carly Rounds for portraying 2/3 of Eccentrica Golumbitz for our opening. Visit our website at digitalwatchesareaprettyneatidea.buzzsprout.com, where you can find links to all my Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy inspired t-shirt designs. You can find us on Facebook and YouTube as Digital Watches Are a Pretty Neat Idea, on Instagram as Watches Idea Podcast, and on Twitter at Watches Idea. If you'd like to contact us, our email is digitalwatchespodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Froods for Thought production.